I'm Danny, and this is the AID podcast, otherwise known as Authentically Inspiring with Danny. Welcome to a space where we talk about the good times, but we don't shy away from difficult, taboo topics either. The goal of this podcast is to provide aid and healing in the form of storytelling and share insight from our life experiences. This podcast isn't self-help, nor does it set out to necessarily teach you anything, but rather to share a story and hear your own. Perhaps you learned something along the way. Hi, y'all. Welcome back to the AID podcast. Before we even get into anything else, I need to cover one of the most important aspects of this episode: your support. Time is one of the most complex concepts in this world. Sometimes it moves so fast, like when your kids suddenly go from infants to tiny little people with their own thoughts and personalities, and you don't even understand how it happened, seemingly in the blink of an eye. Other times, it's so incredibly and painfully slow, like when you're doing something meaningless at work or trying to heal from a heartbreak or trauma. So I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to all of you who decided to use 20 minutes of your precious time on this planet listening to my story. I do hope you found something in it, and will continue to find something in this as we go along. And of course, the most special of gratitude givings goes to my amazing wife, who has supported me through most of these experiences I will share with you, and who has also told me, on more than one occasion mind you, to stop being a damn fool when I start to talk down on myself. I literally can't make this dream happen without all of you. So thank you. Speaking of dreams, I need help. Part of what will enable this community to get off the ground is reach, and I don't have it. I also don't have the spare cash for marketing campaigns right now, so this is all organic. If y'all could review on the platforms you listen on, that would be much appreciated. On the topic of platforms, I've expanded into a whole range of options based on what I saw in my analytics for listeners. So you'll find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, Bullhorn, Pocket Casts, Overcast, Stitcher, Pandora, Podbean, and Radio Public. Please continue sharing my LinkedIn updates and episode announcements. And if you don't follow my LinkedIn page, you really should. Alright, let's get to the part you really care about and recap real quick. Our current theme is vulnerability. In the experiment I'm running on podcast format, this episode is about getting through some of the personal experiences I shared with y'all last time. The goal is that maybe what I learned could help someone else, either through listening directly or by word of mouth. My experience is uniquely my own, and there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to people's lives and experiences, so you might find that you can't take anything personally from this episode, and that's okay. But you might be able to make an impact in someone else's life, and that's what this is all about. You might also find that in some cases, as I tell these stories, I did not always respond in the healthiest way. But as I made those mistakes, I also learned from them and got better at handling it again in the future. As you will probably tire of me saying, I am mindful of how my story can impact other people. Because trauma dumping is a real thing that can cause someone to fall into a trauma response, and that's not what this is about. Because of that, I will always issue potential trigger warnings so people can protect their mental space. For this episode, I'd like to issue potential warnings for the following elements: substance abuse, physical abuse, miscarriage, and job loss. With that being said, here's the recap. I told you a small part of the story of getting laid off. Today, we're going to talk about how being vulnerable got me through that situation and how it brought me into the podcasting world. I retold the harrowing tale of how I almost died in my motorcycle accident, had it not been for the safety gear I'd been wearing, and of the impacts to my body and mental state in the most humbling experience of my life. Today, we'll talk about that recovery process. I walked through a profound moment of realization after a cycle of abuse that I deserved better for my life. This topic might need a whole episode or more to itself one day. Lastly, I shared a high-level summary of my wife and I's fertility journey. I'm going to be vulnerable again as we go through that process with more detail, whatever that is. Now that I've said it out loud, I strongly suspect that we're not going to have enough time to cover all of these events in detail, So my podcast format experiment is already debunked. I suppose that's why we call it an experiment, right? If I don't get to it today, I'll cover the cycle breaking and the fertility journey topics in the next episode, or episodes maybe. And then the one after that should be the bringing vulnerability to work episode. I guess it's hard to say once I get talking. Thoughts just kinda flow, and then the plan goes out the window. Let's kick off with job loss and state the obvious. That shit absolutely fucking sucks. Now, as with most experiences, everyone is different. For me, though, I roller coastered through emotions like a ride at an amusement park. It started like any normal day at work, moving through my meetings and answering chats, emails. I came upon a meeting invite sent at around 9 a.m. for a meeting later that afternoon with a vague title that I don't even remember. I'm sure most of you have heard the phrase, trust your gut. Mine was screaming at me that I was going to be laid off that afternoon. I reached out to my trusty manager, whom I love and adore, by the way. She's simply the best, and we'll talk about her in a future episode. Anywho, I sent her a message asking if she had the invite as well. She did. So, I reached out to several more people, and some did, some didn't. I rapidly connected the dots and realized who had the meeting versus who didn't. Everyone in the same job family as me. I'd been trying to stay in good spirits, messaging my friends and peers with positivity, even though my gut was probably ready to murder me for my chosen ignorance. I knew it was coming before we got the group Zoom call, but I approached the entire day with blind optimism and maintained the mantra, they're not going to let such a plethora of talent, leadership, and change agents go. There's no way they're that stupid. I was very wrong. Whomever made that decision was in fact that stupid. The department head read empty words off a script as we got the news like a punch in the stomach. I could feel my gut rolling its eyes and cursing my name. There were many more words in that meeting about our severance, how it was going to happen, what the timeline was, those types of things. And I sat there completely dumbstruck as the words washed over my brain, leaving behind a feeling of emptiness as they faded away, only for new ones to come in and fade away once more. My Virgo rising ass did the only thing I could think to do in that moment. Take notes. If this ever happens to you, take notes. Document everything, because generally speaking, this experience is so overwhelming, you will thank yourself later. And if you're like me, others will thank you too for having the information on hand. Being laid off felt like I was rudderless in a giant body of water, and having that information served as a compass. The day after the layoff, when some of the shock wore off, I grieved the loss of the people that I loved working with. When the rug gets ripped out from underneath you, it's so much harder than when you leave of your own volition. The emotional roller coaster of a layoff sucks. The tears, the anger and bitterness, the exasperation of a job hunt, the defeat of being treated like a number and not a person, and so much more before you reach acceptance, then relief and optimism. Sometimes you reach relief and optimism, and then you get ghosted by a recruiter you'd built rapport with, or a job offer gets rescinded, and you start all over again. This is one of those experiences I've found is best healed over time. When the dust settled a few weeks later, I wrote this comment in my journal. Quote, I'm going to need time. We all are. For some, it is a long time. For others, a bit less. But understanding that everyone is affected by it differently is important. Understanding that it will have lasting effects for some people is also important. I have such a hard time trusting in anything work-related right now, from the recruitment process to actual job execution. What if the next company I work with decides to cut my job family like the last one did? What will I do then? I recognize this is a trauma response I'll carry until it heals over time, or I reach a place that I can let go of that fear, and like many other areas of my life, just roll with the punches. End quote. A couple weeks later, I wrote this. Quote, honestly, this experience gave me so much knowledge that I can use to truly empathize with or even help others who have gone through this as well. I still don't know what I'm going to do, but I am secure in the fact I will eventually be all right. I always am. End quote. And you will be too. While I was job hunting, I was often told that I was too picky, trying to find a job where the values align. One where I can be authentically me and let my passion loose. one that appreciates and values me. Can't tell you how many people had told me to just take a job because it's income and I was unemployed and I had a family to take care of. But I don't want just fair market compensation. I want to do something that matters. I want to make an impact and help people learn and grow, and create cultures to enable them to do just that so that their best work shines through. I want to make their lives easier and show them empathy because it's lacking in spades in today's world when we need it the absolute most. If you have to settle where it makes sense, where you personally know you can compromise. Maybe that's your pay, maybe that's taking a bridge job while you continue searching for the right one. Maybe it's taking a mental health break, because after all, this is a life-changing event. My personal recommendation is that you definitely take some time for you to center yourself before tackling the next big thing. Whatever it is for you. You know yourself better than anyone. Support yourself first, identify what you need, so that you can better support others later. One of the things I recommend for most life-changing experiences is group support. Not everyone is comfortable with this, but I highly suggest working to get comfortable with it, because it can truly be a lifesaver. If I ever have to say just one thing about the Agilists that I worked with prior, is that we fucking rallied around each other. In one of the greatest displays of the teamwork that we try and build on our own teams, we made a Slack server for all of us to vent to, share new knowledge with, and network. We shared job roles that weren't a fit for us, but might be for someone else, and we connected them to the recruiters we've been working with if jobs didn't pan out for us. Myself and others formed a small group that met every morning via Zoom for a hybrid coffee catch-up/therapy session. It was from this mini group that this podcast was born, and the encouragement of some very persuasive Ground Zero supporters. They strongly believe in me and what this can become, and I wouldn't have ever done this without them and their positive affirmations that this was even a possibility. This mini community that we'd formed became not only a support group, but a method for job hunting that was pinpointed to our careers and a hyper network of leads. If you ever experience a layoff, I would suggest doing something similar, if not for your mental health and sanity, for the advantages of job hunting. It is 100% okay to ask for help, despite how hard it can be. Be vulnerable, share your situation, and take absolute advantage of your network. Reach out to people with whom you may not have spoken to in a while. Make a public social media post, blast it everywhere. Tell people to actively share it for you. Shed the cloak of societal shame for losing your job. It wasn't your fault, but rather the quote-unquote leadership that somehow got to keep their jobs and all their infinite wisdom that led to the piss-poor planning that could have prevented these layoffs in the first place. Let people make connections for you to the people that you don't know yet. I'd also say to let go of the opportunities you know aren't right for you, so that you can keep your energy focused on a few solid ones. Mass application doesn't work in this day and age anymore, and it's definitely about who you know. Oh, and if there's anyone listening to this podcast who can affect the recruitment processes, on behalf of all of the job hunters out there, please innovate on the outdated ass hiring process, and if you're able to, please stop making me input my resume 4 times into different spots in your hiring tool. We would appreciate it. A few moments ago, I mentioned that it's okay to ask for help. I'll be entirely honest. This, for the longest time, was not my strong suit. Sometimes it still rears its head, but the stubbornness I exhibited as a young woman kept me from making a lot of progress in my life. I closed off opportunities because I wanted to be the one who created the opportunity for myself, not take advantage of someone else opening a door for me. In a work sense, I indirectly hindered myself from networking, promotions, and other career opportunities because I wanted to believe that my work ethic and work itself would speak volumes, and that would be all the credibility and justification I needed. Oh boy, was I wrong. As I got older, I noticed the struggle to get promoted or recognized got harder. So I forced myself to work harder, at one point working 12-hour days. I told myself that the bar had been raised, and therefore I had to bust my ass even more. It didn't make a damn bit of difference. There's a quote that circulates the internet, and I have no idea who originally said it, but it's a strong quote that says, "Surround yourself with people who would mention your name in a room full of opportunities." Be that person, and let that person help you if they exist in your life. If they don't, Set out to find someone to be that person for you and let them elevate you and sing your praises. It gets less awkward over time, I promise. In a personal sense, I shut myself off from building deeper relationships and made life overall harder on myself because I refused to ask for help and in some cases, take it. Now, I had to do a lot of therapy to explore where that came from and how to validate those emotions before I could solve the problem. For me, my refusal to ask for help came from my childhood, where I would beg for help, or understanding, or patience, or for someone to see how much pain I was in since I couldn't talk about it for fear of future retribution. I was left alone, ignored, and had to figure most of life out by myself. Now, some of the adults I sought help from probably didn't want to make things worse for me at home, which I respect. It's a touchy situation with no real right answer. When I made it to adulthood, I made conscious choices to figure life out on my own because I didn't trust that anyone else would be able to help me. In the event help was forced on me, I got angry about it and lashed out at people who wanted to help me. Like I said, sometimes I did not handle things in the healthiest way. But I do believe that because I have a growth mindset, I had to make these mistakes so that I could learn how to properly apologize and what accountability was and how that benefited my growth. The lessons I was taught in childhood through those experiences created the belief that I could only rely on myself. And cue the motorcycle accident. Y'all, Karma is a feisty lady who doesn't enjoy being taunted. Let me tell you how I know this. The day of my motorcycle accident, I registered for college. This was something many people had spent years telling me I wasn't going to do. After all, I'd squandered the opportunities I'd gotten with arrogance or indifference, or my personal favorite, choosing to stay in my hometown with my high school sweetheart instead of going across the country for college. So college eluded me for a few years post-high school. I was bothered by the number of comments I'd gotten about it, how I'd never make anything of myself because I lacked a piece of paper. So much so that I saved up money in spite of those people who tried to bring me down, and I paid for a semester of college classes. I'll never forget the day that I paid for those classes. I was absolutely ecstatic, and as I got onto my motorcycle, I was riding a high I hadn't felt in years. Proving people wrong is one of my favorite things to do, so before I set off for home, I posted to social media with the following comment. I'm a college student. All you people who told me I could never do it, you can all go play in traffic. And I ended it with a smiley face. Yes, that is what I really typed out into the universe. Whereupon about 5 minutes later, the message I got back was I needed to humble my ass. The next social media post I made said, got hit by a car yesterday. Ow. And ow was a fucking understatement. 3 days after that, I lost my job. I had been in some really low points in my life thus far. But it felt so much worse to me to be in a low point after I felt like I was starting to get my life together. From my perspective then, this accident destroyed my life. I lost all of that hard-earned money because I couldn't attend the classes, and the school wouldn't refund me. I lost my job while lying in a hospital bed. Couldn't really walk. I was hopped up on pain pills. Couldn't cook, couldn't shower. Really, just couldn't do anything by myself. My recovery process was long and brutal. I had a bruised body, bruised ego, and worst of all, a bruised spirit. Everything I'd worked so incredibly hard for over the past several years was stripped from me in an instant, all because of someone else's choice to text while driving. Their stupidity nearly cost me my life, and it did cost me everything I'd worked so hard for over the previous years. Think about that for a moment. Someone else's choice, made in a fraction of a second, devastated my entire world. Remember that, and please don't use your phone while driving. It can wait. Or, if it can't, pull over. That moment you pause on the side of the road could literally save someone's life. Or even your own. I don't remember much of my stay in the hospital. Mostly because of the large amount of morphine pumping into my body. I do remember my mama bear, which is what I call my adoptive mom, by the way, being there next to my hospital bed. I remember astronomical amounts of pain as I was discharged and trying to get into a car. I remember that pain not really subsiding, even with pain medication, for some weeks. My girlfriend at the time helped with most things I needed at home, like food, showering, the restroom, and I was so ashamed. I felt weak and useless, which made me angry, and I vocalized my frustrations generously, like a Texas thunderstorm does with lightning. If you don't understand that reference, it's a lot. Upon retrospect, when I was older, truthfully, I was afraid. I'd spent my entire life building up a tough exterior and protecting myself with walls, that being in such a vulnerable state was a spotlight exposing the whole lie. I felt like people would realize I wasn't as strong as I portrayed myself to be, and they'd take advantage of me. At some point in this recovery, I spent time on my mama bear's couch, with two of my siblings doing everything they could to comfort me with their presence and trying their damnedest to will me into healing. They would meticulously maneuver around me on the couch, trying to find the best place where they could cuddle with me without hurting me. And recounting it now warms my heart and brings tears to my eyes just a smidge, and just as much as it did then. This moment of watching these two tiny humans trying so hard to be near me without hurting me, trying to show me their love and support in their own way, was one of the realizations that sometimes I didn't need to ask for help, and it didn't need to be forced on me. It was just there, if I wanted to let it in. And help takes on many forms and shapes. What I realized is that the help that felt forced on me wasn't the help I needed. It was the help the other person thought I needed. And that came from their own life experiences. They weren't trying to control me or make decisions for me. Now, some people will 100% try and do that, so you have to watch out for that. But in this case, once I realized that they were coming from a good place with their help, I could make a choice to either accept or deny that. Some of you may be familiar with the little cartoon depictions of an angel and a devil on each shoulder, both arguing over what you should do next. Mine were annoying as hell. The back and forth on my mental load as I unpacked what I wanted and what I needed to heal and move forward, fighting with my previous trauma and trust issues stemming from that trauma, damn near drove me nuts. And the stress, wow, that was soul-crushing. The red tape between the insurance companies, the hospital, the lawyer, and the police station, not to mention the financial impact of an accident like this, it was overwhelming. I nearly fainted when the hospital bill started arriving. Fortunately, since the accident wasn't my fault, the guy who hit me and his insurance were liable for my medical bills through the PI lawsuit I had. But all of this, and I am grossly simplifying this, finally broke me as a human being. My mental state had been so fragile already that it finally crumbled to match the state of my physical body. I had never worked with insurance companies before, or a lawyer, and I was faced with the reality that I didn't have a clue what to do. So I just laid in bed and cried, letting the hopelessness wash over me. As I was having this breakdown, I finally conceded that I couldn't do this alone. If I wanted to stop suffering the stress, the physical and mental pain, that hopelessness and loss of all of my efforts, I needed professional help in order to heal properly. I went through the motions of physical therapy and loads of doctor's appointments. I started seeing a therapist. I viewed time as my worst enemy because my progress was agonizingly slow. All I wanted was to be able to play sports again and to get my life back on track. I had been so close before this happened, and I refused to give up, even though it would have admittedly been easier at the time. Hindsight is 20/20, they say, and had I given up, I certainly wouldn't have the life I have now. Despite losing that life that I'd been building, I knew I could build it back again, to have that life I dreamed of as a teenager. Time went from being my enemy to my helping hand. Eventually, though it truly did feel like forever, my wounds began to heal, both physical and emotional. Walking got easier, my gait smoother and less clunky. I could stand for longer periods of time. The bruises faded and the cuts closed. My bones fused themselves back together. The day my cast in my boot came off, I was overjoyed. My first run gave me the same high as when I signed up for college the day of the accident. When I was able to climb a tree again, the air was definitely fresher. Like being laid off, Time was the best thing to help me with this experience, though being vulnerable and recognizing that I needed the help was a close second. Therapy was third, but finding someone to safely talk to would be your goal. Now that my body had recovered, recovering my life progress was next. I got a new job and set to work picking up the pieces. Whenever I tell this story, people always ask me if I got another motorcycle after the first one. The answer is yes, but my now wife told me that she wanted me alive and such, so I sold my bike and got a car instead. But it was very important to my mental health to work through the fear and get back on one. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't going to let that fear have a hold on me. I began to dig myself out of the crater that this accident left in my life, until a smaller second meteor came crashing down when my then girlfriend cheated on me. That's a story for another day, but it involves World of Warcraft, and yes, you can laugh at me for that. But the game does carry mostly positive memories for me, like the one I'm about to share with you now. Back in the day, I loved this game, and the people I met and built digital relationships with were easier to talk to than my physical, real-life friends. The protection of anonymity by hiding behind a character name served as a shield for me, but the people I built those relationships with were real. I've often heard that people come into our lives for a host of reasons, some to stay and be lifelong, others only for a fraction of our life on this earth. But they all have an impact and are in our lives for a reason. My online friends listened to my problems and offered insight and wisdom beyond my own years, and helped provide welcome and needed distraction from taking myself way too seriously as a 21-year-old. They helped me come out to some family members, and were there for me when it didn't go well. They gave me laughter when I needed it the most. We stayed in touch for quite some time, but life happened for each of us and pulled us into different directions as we all grew apart. But I'll never forget the help they gave me, and I'll forever be grateful for it. I discovered a lot about myself from being laid off and from having to start building my life back after the accident. I grieved what I'd lost in both of those experiences. It felt like I'd lost part of myself in one experience, and the entirety of myself in the other. But I've learned in my life that I will always be okay, which is where my mantra comes from. It may not be fine right now, but it will be. It's okay to feel the emotions and important to validate them. It was a lot of reflective work, but I learned to shift my perspective from victimizing myself, from asking, why me? Why does this bad stuff keep happening to me? To, there's a reason the universe sent this my way. What do I need to be learning right now? Without the life I've had, who knows what stories I'd have to tell. What I do know is that you shouldn't be like younger me. Suffering in silence should never be an option, and if you find yourself doing that, you owe it to yourself to seek help. Vulnerability, asking for help, these are not elements of weakness, but rather of strength. You owe yourself discovering your strength. You owe yourself the time it takes to heal and grow into someone better. Don't get me wrong, it is hard to ask for help, especially if there's trauma rooted in why you don't. Be patient with yourself and give yourself grace as you learn and work your way through whatever you need to. Remember that vulnerability and time are the ultimate healers. And please trust me when I say that help does exist in many facets of the world. We just have to know where to find it, and more importantly, be willing to accept it. It's time to wrap up, but thank you for listening. I truly hope that you found something for yourself in today's podcast, and I appreciate you being part of the stream of mine. I hope you consider joining me on this journey to aid one another. I truly believe that community is one of the most powerful things we possess, and if you're able and willing, please visit my Patreon at patreon.com/theaidpodcast to learn how you can be part of this community and help it grow. Certain Patreon tiers will have special perks and access, such as our private Discord support community. You do need to be over the age of 18 for that, and you will have to go through a verification process to join. I'll also be offering special video recorded episodes with guests in the future, where you'll get to hear somebody else's unique life experience and how they navigated through it. You can also check us out on Instagram and LinkedIn at The Aid Podcast. We're also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts by searching for The Aid Podcast. And remember, it may not be fine right now, but it will be. Stay safe out there, folks, and I'll see you next time for AID.